All right, guys, this is going to be a bit of a longer walkthrough for Act 1, Scene 2. I just want to make sure that you get all the best moments here. Lots of important stuff going on. So, where it says king here, that's Claudius. And Claudius is Hamlet's uncle, of course, who has married his mother. And this is the speech where the audience kind of learns those things, if I hadn't already told you that. And so here he says, of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory is green, meaning my brother Hamlet Sr. died pretty recently, and our kingdom has been cast in grief and woe. He says, however, then our sometime sister, now our queen, pointing out that he has married his sister-in-law, that we have decided to get married. And then he gives this great line with mirth in funeral and dirge in marriage that shows the juxtaposition of these events and how off-putting that is, not just to Hamlet, but in general. Mirth means happiness and dirge means mourning. And so he's saying, he's expressing how the mirth of their marriage is mixed up with the dirge of their funeral by saying mirth in funeral and dirge in marriage in equal scale weighing, delight and dole, meaning we have dolor means sadness. And so he's saying we have, you've got this juxtaposition again of sadness and joy with these two events that came one right after the other. And then he explains to the courtiers about Fortinbras' war, and he sends Cornelius and Voltimand off to get news from the war front. Now enter Laertes. And this is a moment where the audience first meets Laertes, and he right away establishes himself as a foil for Hamlet, because the first thing that he is doing is asking to return to school. He's saying, I came home to Denmark for the funeral and the wedding, and now I would like to go back to school. And later in the scene, Hamlet is going to, or Claudius is going to ask Hamlet to stay home. So here's that immediate contrast between the two of them. Laertes wants to go back to school. He went to school in France. Hamlet is going to stay in Denmark rather than go back to school in Germany. And so then it's very important that you note that the very first line that Hamlet speaks in this play is an aside. He turns to the audience and makes a remark. And this introduces an important relationship in this play between Hamlet and the audience. Hamlet spends a lot of time in these asides, in these soliloquies where he is speaking to the audience on stage alone, or he is speaking to them off to the side. And so it kind of brings the audience in as his confidant, that he is turning to them before he turns to Claudius or Gertrude. And notice also that Claudius immediately addresses him as cousin and son, which cousin would mean nephew here. So he's again pointing out this weird relationship, which is what Hamlet is commenting on, because he says, my cousin Hamlet and my son. And he says, we are a little more than kin, meaning we are a little too much family right now, being both your cousin and your son. And you are a little less than kind for pointing that out. And so then the king and the Queen Gertrude began to kind of pester Hamlet for his sadness. How is it the clouds still hang on you? She says, cast your nighted color off. Look at it as, look like a friend on Denmark, which when they use Denmark like this, they're referring to the king. This is an example of metonymy, where they're using the nation's name to refer to the king himself. And so she says, seek not thy noble father in the dust. They're saying, come on, you need to cheer up already. And he says, no, my lord, I am too much in the sun. This is another pun. Shakespeare loves puns. He just called him sun, and he's saying, I'm too much in the sun, also playing off of the clouds. And she says, it's common. This is Gertrude now. She says, it's common. All that lives must die. And Hamlet says, aye, madam, it is common. This is a play on the word common. The word common can mean low class. The word common can mean crude and improper. And so he's kind of throwing that back at her. She says, it's normal. It's ordinary. All that lives must die. And he says, what you've done, mother, is low class and common. But then she doesn't catch that, of course. That's for our benefit. She says, so why are you making this so particular to you? Why are you taking your father's death so personally if you know that all that lives must die? And this is where Hamlet goes into this long speech of seems rather than be. He says, seems, madam? Nay, it is. I know not seems. 'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath. No, nor the fruitful river of tears in my eye, or the dejected behavior of my visage, my face, together with all forms, moods, and shapes of grief that can denote me truly. All these things I just said, do indeed seem, for they are actions that a man might play. But I have within that which passes show, these but the trappings and suits of woe. So he's saying it is not just the way I'm dressing. It is not just that I'm sighing or crying or looking sad. Yes, I know a man might play these, might seem to be grieving, but he says, mother, I have within me a grief that passes this showing. I have within me more than just these suits, these dressings of woe. And so he's saying to her, I'm not pretending, mother. I really am this bothered. Can you not tell? But Claudius cannot tell. And he goes on to say, and that's so sweet and commendable that you would give such a mourning duty to your father, but you must know that, your father lost a father, that father lost his. He says, people die all the time. This happens all the time. Now you've reached the point of unmanly grief. You are showing a will most incorrect to heaven. He says, you are being sinfully grieving at this point. And he says it's a vulgar thing to carry on this way and take it so greatly to heart. It's a fault to heaven, a fault against the dead. He tries to say it's against your father's memory to carry on such. You're being absurd over this common theme of death of fathers. And so then he says, we pray you to cast away this woe and think of us as a father. Us is the royal we. He's referring to himself. And were I there with you, I would say, how many of you have had divorced parents? And has your step-parent ever said, oh, think of me as your father or mother? And how did that make you feel? Because here is Claudius, 1 month after marrying his mother, 2 months after his father has died, saying, oh, get over your sadness for your father. Think of me as your new father now. And then to try to make him feel better, he says, you're the most immediate to the throne. You'll get this throne when I pass on. In case what you're worried about, Hamlet, is your inheritance, you'll still inherit the throne from me. And then he goes on to say, please stay home and don't go back to college. Hamlet agrees to not go back to college. And then Claudius and Gertrude exit, leaving Hamlet alone for his first long soliloquy. And we will be going back to look at these soliloquies to examine how themes arise within them that carry through the whole play. But I just want to point out a couple of them here. He says, oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. His flesh. He's talking about his mortality. or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. I wish that God had not made rules against suicide, self-slaughter. I wish I would evaporate from this earth, or that I could do something about it myself. Catholicism and religious beliefs are pretty important to Hamlet here. And then he goes on and he says, this world is just weary, stale, and flat. This world is an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Only rank and gross things are still growing here. And then he begins to really rail and go off on his mother. He gets really angry here. That it should come to this, but 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. And then he compares his father to Claudius. He says, Hyperion to a satyr would be my father to Claudius. My father was so loving to my mother. And he says, she would hang on him. But within a month, let me not think on it. Frailty, thy name is woman. He's so confused and mad at his mother. He says, ere those shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body, she has instead married with my uncle and jumped with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It cannot come to good. And this kind of sets up his conflict, his inner conflict, his turmoil that he's feeling here at the start of the play. The play opens with Hamlet in a very, very bad, dark place. And then Horatio shows up to say, hey, we just saw the ghost of your dad. Come see it with us tonight. I hope that helps you catch the most important parts here of Act 1, Scene 2.